Joseph Anderson's piece is based on a piano work by John Cage, one of the great experimenters of 20th century music. Anderson has taken the chance elements in Cage's work and extended them to explore the relationship between music and noise, a topic which fascinated Cage himself.
The three main types of starting material were the piano itself, the recording of the piano.
I'm trying to remember. I think it must have begun for me.
Then there's a recording of Cage speaking. Then the other sound material was, of course, the record noise. The piece is really an interplay between the collision of these different sounds, and sometimes it's more or less direct mixing, you know, one placed on top of the other, or a cut from one to the other as side by side. Sometimes it's a bit more intertwined. The voice speaks with the sound of a piano.
Mirrors.
Similarly, there are sections where the voice becomes noise, and the piano has the shape of noise, and all these different collisions can have different incarnations in one way or the other. Making the impossible possible is what I look to the computer to do.
Anderson's method of working involves the direct creation of sound at the computer.
The method that I use is one of the more powerful but also the more tedious methods of synthesizing sound. It's direct digital synthesis. The computer just crunches away on a set of instructions and then churns out some sound. This is a Bach chorale, and the orchestra is rather straightforward. It's simply made up of an oscillator, this is the code for that, and an envelope generator. And we just give it a few things: duration, amplitude, rise and decay of the envelopes, the pitch of the note, and the waveform to be used. And then our score that will play that orchestra looks like this. And this group of notes here specifies the first phrase for the chorale in the soprano line.
To synthesize new sounds, Anderson uses a program within the computer called a score preprocessor.
Again, this screen looks like a whole bunch of numbers as well, but the numbers mean something different than notes. They're instructions to the score preprocessor to make a bunch of notes that make a certain kind of gesture shape. In this case, it's going to sound sort of like rattling a gamelan or bell. In a way, it's instructions to allow the computer to improvise. At the very top, we have a list of possible frequencies and the associated amplitudes that go with them. And this information here is derived from an actual analysis of the gong tone.
From the earliest days of acousmatic music, Some composers have tried to bring together technology and live performers. In the 60s, Stockhausen asked musicians to improvise and then used electronic equipment to process the sounds.
The instrument, which is the source of the vibration, is no longer so important. What is important is what you do with it. That means, again, I can work now with all the traditional instruments, so I have the electronic equipment somewhere close to the players or in the hall. And the players produce the sound as live generators. And then, well, some other musicians sit in the hall and filter them, modulate them, distribute them in the hall, make them move between the speakers.
Computers allowed this process to be taken further. At IRCAM, the Music Research Institute in Paris, Pierre Boulez was able to record and instantly resynthesize the sounds of instruments as the musicians were playing.
And now if I add a pedal to that, everything will be just related together. And now if I have more of it, all these sounds together, it will give a very complicated line which multiplies the original one.
I've gone through certain phases in my compositional life. One being out-and-out acousmatic composer, where I said, stuff performance. The performance is actually the guy at the desk who's diffusing, and it should all be on tape. But now I can see a lot of exciting opportunities for expressive performance and bringing the performer back on stage, because, let's face it, the visual element does help. And if you can combine the two, then why not? This example in my piece uses the violin when I'm playing it very traditionally, and then uses also quite acousmatic sounds based on a very similar process to the way Jonty's demonstrated. And there's a sort of bridge in the middle, which is my violin sounds that have been slightly treated. So you can hear that there are 3 layers. Myself on stage, violin sounds interspersed within the tape part, and the actual more concrete tape material. The way I've written this score is trying to put little upbeats and little pointers in the tape part that won't necessarily make it sound like a little click where it says, okay, you play now. But try and make these pointers part of the tape part, but also a very clear sound object upbeat for me to know, well, come in now. I recorded the violin part, put that on the machine, and then reconstructed a new violin part, adding the tape part at the same time. I really didn't want to write a tape part and then improvise a violin part above, or write a violin part and then add a tape part because I wanted to write the piece as one whole unit.
At Beast, composers are closely involved in performance. John T. Harrison operates the mixer which diffuses the sound to the network of speakers around the hall.
It's actually the reverse of a normal mixer where you bring many signals together and mix them down to just say one stereo. What actually happens here is that the stereo signal comes in and is then duplicated onto all the output faders. So instead of being, mixers usually described as so many in, so many out, like 24 in, 8 out or something like this is actually 12 in, 32 out, which is completely upside down. What is actually happening is that each fader is driving a particular amplifier, which in turn is driving a particular loudspeaker in the room. And so what you're doing is changing the stereo disposition between one stereo pair of loudspeakers and another. You need always, somewhere, at some point, to be able to bring the image very tight into the middle. And so we have what we call the main, some people call the solo speakers, which are the ones that are more or less right in front of me. But beyond that, I would also need some wider loudspeakers, so there's a wide pair. And I've put those on the mixer next door. With these two, I'm able to make the image expand and contract laterally. Another thing that we found always really to be necessary is that we need a pair of loudspeakers in the distance. And now these are in fact right up in the far corners. We've angled them in. So they're actually angled across quite a long way in front of me. I mean, the image actually thereby is maintained up there as a distant image, another plane behind this frontal array. And my distant speakers are there. Now, so far, that's 6 loudspeakers all in front of us. And, of course, we also can hear behind us, so we have a pair at the rear. Those are the most significant loudspeakers. If I were to make sudden motions of the loudspeakers, those would be the things that would give the cues to the listener that the sound is moving around. I would say the next most important things are these 4, which are, in the case of these two, the subwoofers, or the bins, we call them the bass bins. In other words, very low frequency speakers. And then to complement the bottom end, we also have the top end, the tweeters. And they don't require, like most cone and diaphragm type loudspeakers, these don't need any cabinets, which is great for us because what we've actually done is put them on the end of these arrays that look something like umbrellas. And these actually go through an equalizer, so all you're picking up are the topmost frequencies, and it has the effect of lifting the image without you necessarily being aware that all the sound's coming from up there. It's not that effect, it's one of sort of lifting the image slightly and lightening it. I regard this very much as an extension of the compositional process, and the same kinds of concerns that occupy me as a composer when I'm in the studio working with material continue to occupy me at the point of public performance, because it's at that point that a particular individual in the audience will hear the piece. I think that our ears are very underrated. Our ears are capable of taking in and processing far more information than they're normally given credit for. There is a section where there are the sounds of footsteps on 3 different surfaces. One is gravel, one is shingle by the seashore, and the other is snow. Now, you cannot physically have those 3 coexisting, but they can coexist orally, and you could believe in them all. And the experience, because one is able to cut, because one is able to dissolve, and all those other techniques that cinema has, it is like a kind of internalized cinema that happens when the ear is stimulated in this way. And one is able to track through what might, in another dimension, be a cinematographic experience, but it's entirely orally triggered and experienced, and in fact the projection is internal and not external.
If you'd like to know exactly when and where Open University programmes are being shown, then call